So welcome back to everybody who's following the Citizens' Assembly here in Malahide on the web. We're delighted to have you following our proceedings, and what we're going to do now, we have the members of the Assembly here are sitting at 14 round tables, and we're going to get feedback from those round tables. First of all, we will hear from 7 of the facilitators about what was discussed in the morning, and then the next 7 will report on the afternoon. So I'm going to ask the facilitator from table 1 now to tell us what your table discussed this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The citizens from table 1, in relation to the first question regarding gender inequality in Ireland, there was a unanimous yes that there is gender inequality in Ireland. In relation to the second point, in respect of their own experiences, they identify this in the workplace, the home, parental direction, historical experience of women, to quote, chained to the sink, the segregation in public houses and the chapel, taking the name of the husband, and single-sex schools. And there was also the historical experience of women just after childbirth having to be cleansed at the altar before they could proceed with the sacraments. In considering how they would have changed their view from the earlier survey, 50%, there was about half and half, had changed their view from what they had put down in terms of the priorities on that survey. There was one further question about, and are you taking further questions? There was one further question, is why is gender quota not applied to local elections? There was an administrative matter, but you've already dealt with that regarding things. Thank you.
Thank you. The citizens at table 2 did feel that gender inequalities exist, but felt it was difficult to know to what extent this was the case. In many employment positions, men and women earn the same hourly rate. However, inequalities are more visible in such areas as the government. And in banking, there are more males at higher management level. And then in such areas as physiotherapy, there are more females. Women can face some intangible obstacles. Some who are mothers can feel that they must always be available for their children. However, men who have children are better able to compartmentalize work from home, and to be fully focused on work when at work. A question then arose as to what extent a father would act differently if a mother wasn't available in the background for their children. Parents with child-minding obligations can face difficulties if one parent needs to leave work early to collect children. Staying in work for longer hours can create more opportunities for promotion. And it was discussed that in other countries there's a move towards a 4-day working week, which would value efficiency over long working hours. The table actually thought that Ireland would have performed better than the EU average, instead of being roughly on par in respect of the gender pay gap. Gender inequality is particularly visible, the table thought that gender inequality was particularly visible in children's toys. For example, one example was raised that a company makes PCs for boys and girls, and the PCs made for girls had half the number of apps and was pink in color. And then in clothes, the same company, for example, had a male child's top with "I'm Superman" on it, and a female top with "I hate my thighs" on it. So that was notable. And finally, there was discussion on the use of gender-neutral names for girls to reduce gender bias in job applications.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The citizens at this table felt that there is still gender equality in Ireland today. However, they were reassured by the fact that we are 7th on the European Gender Equality Index. They felt that Ireland is quite progressive when it comes to gender equality, and that we can take consolation from the fact that anti-discrimination legislation commenced enactment in the 1970s in Ireland. They felt that we were a country on a journey. They felt that the language used this morning lacked inclusivity regarding people who identify as gender fluid and non-binary. It's not either or, but both and. There's more to be done on norms and attitudes towards men, and that there was an honesty about acknowledging this morning in the presentations and the research. They were reassured that biology was given some context this morning as well, and that overlap between male and female remains considerable. A lot of socialization is built on small biological differences and expectations that go with that. We had lots of discussions around education, and they felt that education is steering children towards stereotypical jobs. They felt that the curriculum should be developed more, and the schools need to provide a fuller range of subjects for boys and girls. There needs to be more diversification of subjects on the curriculum. And they learned something new this morning as well, the pinkification of girlhood. And they wanted to know, was there no bluification of boyhood? Research can be one-dimensional, and the equivalent male research doesn't seem to have been done.
All the citizens from this table acknowledged that they also felt gender inequalities still do exist. However, it's also felt that they feel it's getting better, has improved, and there is growing awareness. Some of the issues are similar to what has already been mentioned, but in addition, paternity leave was mentioned. It was felt that until there is equality in terms of paternal and maternity leave, inequalities will still exist. There was also discussion around job selection, and when choosing a job, men tended to be primarily motivated by the pay, whilst women had many additional factors and had to consider maternity leave and flexible working conditions as important factors and motivators in choosing their job. There were also discussions about the nature-nurture debate, and there was a general feeling from the table that women had a more instinctive gene, as it were, to be the primary caregiver to the children, particularly in the very younger years. Considering personal experiences, an example was given that in our school situations where there may be an issue with a child, it's nearly always the mother who's contacted first. And in addition, when they're filling out the forms for schools, parents themselves self-select the mother to be the primary contact. Finally, in relation to the final question, the citizens' views generally remained the same. The CSO presentation had brought greater awareness and a new awareness to the extent of some of the inequalities, in particular to the area of the paid and unpaid work differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the first point, there was broad consensus from the citizens at this table that there does continue to be gender inequality existing in Ireland today. In relation to personal experiences, quite a bit of conversation about personal experiences from the citizens at this table. And in terms of observations, there were a couple of observations made in relation to that. First of all, that the entitlements and rights for lone fathers are not necessarily advertised or made available, and perhaps some men don't actually know what they're actually entitled to in relation to children and support. Men don't seem to have a voice in this regard, and perhaps are not as supported as they might be. Also, in relation to sick children and children with special needs, there was an observation that perhaps more equal rights for fathers on decision-making for their children in relation to unmarried couples, and I know this will probably travel into tomorrow's discussion, so I won't talk too much about that. In relation to the earlier survey that was done, the first issue that was broadly agreed at the table was that The economic aspect was the first issue that popped into their head in relation to the inequality. And that quickly turned into a focus on the importance of education, and that became a real concern for the citizens at this table. And I think that's pretty much it.
The citizens at this table feel that gender inequality still exists in Ireland, and they made the following observations. Career progression affected by childcare duties, dealing with multiple identities as well as sexism, e.g. being an immigrant, woman of colour, different faith. Promotions in the military for women tend to be not married, whereas a male counterpart general is expected to be married. Lack of opportunity to choose subjects in school based on history of education in Ireland, which was delivered by faith-based schools. Unconscious bias of women in the workplace. Stereotyping women politicians based on appearance. Economic and workplace opportunities available to more due to the opportunity to attend private schools, i.e. politicians and CEOs. And just one comment, and I know the chair has addressed it already. Citizens would like copies of the presentations ahead of sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The citizens at this table, similar to the other tables, that they feel that gender inequality exists. From what they've heard this morning, they feel that in order to break gender inequality, that it needs to start at a very young age. In terms of the second question, the citizens at this table were relaying their experiences of inequality that they would have gone through at a younger age, but also in their present lives. And then in terms of the third question, in the main or generally, the citizens at this table, their opinions haven't changed. However, there was a small number where they feel that their opinions would have changed slightly.
The citizens at table 8, we're addressing the afternoon questions. So the first one is, yes, gender does affect life choices, but it is only one of many things that affect it. Family, environment also affect it. Difference in development of maturity between boys and girls. They develop at different rates, particularly in the younger years. Boys should be offered home economics, maybe perhaps rename it as we had it many years ago as domestic science, maybe be a little bit more attractive. And also that girls should be offered the other choices like woodwork, science, metalworks and whatever. And again, it was noted that an example of Lego was always a unisex toy, but more recently it's now being targeted as specific genders. And also in that as separate aisles in toy shops for boys and girls. You know, when has that come into play? STEM subjects should be offered from an early age, say from creches, and introduced as a fun factor, would also help. Equivalent opportunity should be a better way of dealing with gender issues rather than just aiming towards results. And finally, encouragement in schools should be equal and gender neutral.
The citizens at table 8, or table 9, sorry. One citizen asked that you note that a citizen had observed negativity towards a male colleague when requesting paternity leave. Citizens suggest that there should be more time between speakers so they can pose questions for each speaker and then at the end or absorb the topics. And gender stereotyping understanding should which includes sports in school, should be part of teacher practice and may be introduced to pre-teens and 6th class students. Thank you.
Thanks very much. From table 10, yeah, we've clearly felt that obviously gender does obviously affect the life choices people make. It was evident from just about all of the presentations and that we saw this morning, and particularly the employment graph clearly showed that that's the case. And we felt that it was actually very hard to think of any examples where that was not the case, more so. The second question, should understandings of gender stereotyping be incorporated? We felt it should be, and from a very early age, should be incorporated into teacher training before they, as part of their core training. We're not 100% sure that it doesn't already do that, but that would be a suggestion from us. With regard to the need for initiatives to encourage girls to take STEM subjects, yeah, we felt again that if you could address the second question, there'd be much less need for initiatives to encourage girls into those types of subjects. But I think with both question 3 and 4, that would have been the same view that we would have had. And I think we felt that, having access to these subjects within schools is the key to it. And that might involve something like sharing between 2 schools, because obviously there's an issue with facilities and not having enough teachers for some of the subjects. And if you could share between schools, that might be a way of getting around that problem. I suppose one other point we made was that maybe there should be less same-sex schools and more mixed schools within society. Thank you.
The citizens at table 11 considered yes, that gender affects the life choices that people make. Furthermore, they considered that we should be trying to educate children as young as possible on gender stereotyping, i.e. preschool age. Moving on to the next 2 questions, the citizens at this table considered that structural problems created by timetabling clashes should be removed so that all students can meaningfully have access to all subjects, in particular students in same-sex schools, equal opportunity for all. And finally, curriculum changes and timetabling changes alone won't suffice, but will require broader social, home and cultural support, e.g. being mindful of those cultures with differing value systems and understandings.
Good afternoon. The majority of citizens at table 12 decided that social conditioning about gender have a greater effect than gender alone on life choices. On question 2, the majority of the citizens thought it should be included in teacher training rather than an already full curriculum. On question 3, the citizens think that all careers should be promoted equally rather than pushing genders into careers that they may not have an aptitude or appetite for. And the same applies to the 4th question. And just also a note, the citizens have requested for the presentations as early as possible. Thank you.
The citizens at table 13 made the following points. STEM should include arts and renamed STEAM to include and encourage boys and girls interested in arts as well as maths, etc. Is there a concern for men to enter caring profession, e.g. abuse scandals? Should employers incentivize apprenticeships for girls? Does gender influence choice of travel for girls, women, for long periods, boys more free to do so and gain other life experiences before making life choices? And is education too focused on work, professional life, educated to toil? Thank you.
Afternoon. The citizens at table 14 felt in respect to the first question that they were shocked that there was such a female high percentage in respect to creches and primary school, and it would even out towards more males entering in working in secondary school and universities. They found that extremely interesting. They felt that single-sex schools should certainly be abolished. In respect to the second question, they noted that they wish to implement gender-neutral activities and subjects from primary school upon the children entering in baby infants. In respect to the third question, all the table noted that there was no mention of trades or apprenticeships in STEM subjects, and they felt that there may be an element of snobbery towards ignoring such roles. In respect to the fourth question, they noted that home ec should be compulsory for boys and vice versa, construction studies should be compulsory for girls upon entering school for at least 1 year. There was experience at the table of feeling that they were to select a gender appropriate subject upon entering secondary school and they had no exposure to such a subject, so they made the easy decision. They felt that if it was compulsory for 1 year, they could try it out, and then if they did not have an aptitude, could leave. And finally, the table also wanted to make 2 comments. That the use of technology should be used further to assist in respecting niche subjects. One of the speakers spoke about learning physics and there was not enough students in the school. They noted that video link technology or using a cluster of schools should be utilised. And overall, the table felt that men are the big winners in the recent improvement of the gender imbalance. Examples were given whereby grandfathers would now get to care and show an emotional side to their grandchildren, which they would never had previously been able to show to their own children when they were rearing them.
Well, thank you all very much. I think that's a really rich harvest of comments, and I'm interested where you have not only looked at things in abstraction in general, but also brought some very practical suggestions to the table. So we'll take note of all of this and then weave it into the presentations and the discussions that we're going to have in the coming weekends. So thank you very much for all of the very interesting points that you've made in reaction to what you've heard today. Now, I want to do a little advertising trailer for tomorrow, not necessarily for the people here in the room, but for those who are watching us on the live stream. Tomorrow morning, starting at 9:15 live stream, we're going to be looking at the family. And we're going to be looking, first of all, at how the concept of family in Ireland and the structure of families has changed over recent decades. And then we will be looking at what does the Constitution say about the family, and we'll also be looking at the clause that's usually described as the woman in the home. So we'll be looking at all of these issues tomorrow morning. Having looked at the Constitution, we will hear how the courts interpret the Constitution, how that affects our laws and our policies. And like we've done today, we will be hearing personal experiences from people about how these laws, policies and the Constitution affects them in real life. So by way of an introduction to what we're going to be discussing tomorrow, we're going to run now a video that we have sent to the citizens here in the room, but you may not all have had time to look at it. And even if you haven't, I think it benefits from a second watching. So we're just going to run the video now, please, Darren. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, the Constitution and family. Talk to me about Article 41.
Well, I always think at Article 41, the opening line is the most dramatic line in the Irish Constitution. The first half of that line is pretty standard. It says the state recognises the family as a natural, primary and fundamental unit group in society, which you might argue is just recognising a social fact, which is as true today as it was in the 1930s, albeit that we understand the family very differently now. It's the second part of that opening line that to me is very striking. It talks about the family being a moral institution possessing inalienable rights, antecedent and superior to all positive law. That's very dramatic language. Inalienable rights are rights that cannot be alienated. They cannot be taken away. Antecedent and superior. Antecedent means coming prior to. The family as an institution comes prior to the state and is superior to the state. The suggestion is that it's beyond the control of the state.
So, I mean, we're talking strong, authoritative, dramatic language. I mean, has that then made its mark in the courts?
Yes, it has actually. Now, what I would say is it hasn't been taken literally. I mean, if that language was taken literally, laws prohibiting violence in the home, for example, would be potentially unconstitutional, and there's no question but that such laws are not unconstitutional. The courts have not taken it quite absolutely literally, but it has made its mark in the jurisprudence. Just to take an example, in the early 2000s, the HSE took a case against the parents of a young baby, where those parents objected to the PKU test being carried out on their child, the heel prick test, and the parents won that case. The court found that the authority of the family was such, under Articles 41 and 42, that the state couldn't intervene regardless of the interests of the child in that particular case. Similarly, in the mid-90s, the Oireachtas tried to introduce legislation that would protect vulnerable spouses with respect to the ownership of homes, the Matrimonial Homes Bill, essentially which provided that automatically there would be a presumption that the marital home would be jointly owned on marriage. The court invalidated that legislation despite there being opt-outs in the legislation to allow couples to decide otherwise, because the court found the language in 41 was such that the decision-making authority of the family was, as it were, sacrosanct. Now, the decision-making authority of the family, of course, again, it is important, but very often, or sometimes, it translates into decision-making authority of a powerful figure within the family, to the cost of vulnerable members, whether that might be wives or children.
We've had some constitutional change around the family and the marriage equality referendum, but the Constitution's still very, very firm. It's marital families.
It is. The marriage referendum was hugely significant in 2015, and indeed it amended Article 41, but really just in kind of a technical way. I mean, it just meant that marriage was open to homosexuals on the same basis as heterosexuals. But you're right, Article 41, the case law, is absolutely clear on this. The court made decisions on this as recently as 2018 in M and the Minister for Justice. The family in the Irish Constitution is the family based on marriage, and non-marital families don't enjoy any protection under Article 41 of the Constitution.
The citizens have a lot to examine in these articles in the Constitution, and not just what the Convention looked at and that Women in the Home clause, which has been referred on to the citizens here as well.
Yes, Pádraig, the Women in the Home provision, of course, is in Article 41 later than the provision I talked about earlier. The Convention reached a pretty emphatic conclusion about the Woman in the Home provision. It is, I think it's fair to say, a sexist clause, really out of time. What's striking for me, though, or interesting for me really about that clause, is that it's not actually out of sync with the rest of Article 41. In fact, it chimes with the overall ethos of Article 41. It's overstated the extent to which Catholic social thought influenced the Irish Constitution generally. It had no influence, or almost no influence, on much or most of the Constitution, but on Article 41, 42 and 43, that is family, education and private property, that's where Catholic social thought made its mark. So people might think that that's problematic in 2020 and beyond. That's for the citizens.